Hello, welcome to math. Today we're going to learn about independent and dependent variables, okay? Independent and dependent variables you use in math. You also use them a lot in science. So you probably practice with this in science as well. I know you do it in 7th grade science for sure, and in 8th grade science when you start dealing with graphs and things like that, you also do them as well. Okay, so independent and dependent variables. Okay, when an equation represents a function, the variable that it represents the input values is the independent variable. Input independent. Okay? The variable that represents the output values is the dependent variable. This variable depends on the value of the independent variable. So the dependent variable depends on the independent variable. Okay? All right, so let's think back to when we first learned these vocab words. We learned 3 words that associate with X and 3 words that associate with Y. Take a second, pause the video, see if you remember them. Come back in like 2 seconds and see when you're done. Okay, so the words that go with X, are domain, input, and independent variable. Right? Domain, input, independent variable. Input is our X values. Okay, so what's the words that go with Y? Well, Y is our range, or our output, or our dependent variables. And sometimes you'll see IV or DV for independent and dependent variables. So just shorthand so you don't have to write that whole thing out each time. Okay? All right, so domain, input, independent variable is X. Range, output, dependent variable is Y. All right, so I have a table here, and it says age, years, height, inches. The table to the right shows the age in years and height in inches of a boy. What is the independent variable? Okay, so what's the independent variable? The independent variable would be my age in years, because my height is dependent upon that, right? If the height's dependent on that. A 3-year-old is going to be shorter than a 9-year-old, right? So the height depends on how old that child is, right? So independent variable would be age in years. All right, let's see. Number 2, Jackson is selling lemonade on Saturday as a fundraiser for the football team. The table shows the amount of money in his cash box throughout the day. All right, so it says number of hours, 0, 1, 2, 4, 6, and dollars in his cash box, 8, 22, 36, 64, 92. What is the independent variable? Well, the independent variable would be the number of hours. Because if he's sitting there selling it, the longer he's there selling that lemonade, the more money he should make, right? So that means that the dollars that he has, the dollars that he earns for this fundraiser, depends on the number of hours that they sell the lemonade. Okay? All right, so independent variable would be the number of hours. All right, in this example, I have y equals 4x plus 1, and it says x1, y5. All right, so what would be the independent variable here? Well, the independent variable, we learn, I see I have x and y here, right? So which one does that go with? Well, that goes with our x values. So our independent variable would just be all of our x values, all of our possible x values. Okay, let's keep going on. Okay, so it says Tia wants to keep track of the money on her lunch account. Tia starts with $25 on her lunch account. She spends $3 per day at lunch. What is the dependent variable? Okay, so what's dependent on the other thing? So let's see here. $25 on her lunch account, spends $3 per day. The amount remaining in her lunch account, or the number of days she buys lunch. Okay, so number of days she buys lunch would be our independent variable. That's the thing she can change, right? So what's dependent on the number of days she buys lunch? Well, that would be the amount remaining in her lunch account, right? So that would be our dependent variable. The amount remaining on her account. The amount remaining on her lunch account. Okay, because that is dependent on how many days she buys lunch, right? If she only buys lunch on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, that's 3 days, right? If she buys lunch Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all 5 days during the week, then it's going to be less money in her account, right? So the amount of money remaining on her lunch account depends on how many days that she buys lunch. That's why it's the dependent variable. Okay, all right, so what you're going to do, down here below, there are 2 different things. It says independent variable, dependent variable. And on the last page, there's a whole bunch of situations. You're going to cut these out and glue them if you think it's the independent variable or the dependent variable, right? So like this first one, these are related to each other going across, okay? So like this one says the length of time you'll need to wait and the number of people in line ahead of you. So those are our 2 things that are related to each other. The number of jars of jam that will be able to fill and the amount of strawberries you pick. those two related to each other, right? So each row is related to each other, and you got to figure out which one's the independent variable and which one's the dependent variable. Okay? So go ahead, do that on your own. Get it checked by a teacher when you're done, and I'll catch you next video. Bye!